Commander Threllis of the Galactic Survival Corps stood at the front of the briefing room, all four of his arms gesturing at the holographic display with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for funeral directors. His species, the Methodians, were known throughout the galaxy for two things: their impeccable organizational skills and their complete inability to understand the concept of winging it. "Attention, cadets," Threllis announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone about to explain something very important for the 900th time. "In precisely 6 standard hours, you will be deployed to Deathworld Kappa 7 for your final survival examination." The room full of aliens shifted nervously. There were Chirruk, the insectoid species who treated every problem like a mathematical equation. There were Lumix, crystalline beings who could photosynthesize but somehow still managed to overthink lunch. And then, in the back corner, looking remarkably unbothered, sat Jake Winters, the human. Threllis tapped his datapad, and the hologram exploded into a dizzying array of equipment. The Regulation Survival Kit contains 47 essential items, each tested and approved by the Galactic Safety Committee over 3 centuries of rigorous evaluation. He began listing them with the passion of someone reading a tax code. Item 1, Atmospheric Analyzer. Item 2, Multi-Spectrum Shelter Generator. Item 3, Nutrient Paste Dispenser, Type 7. Item 4, Emergency Beacon with Quantum Entanglement Communicator. Jake raised his hand. Threllis's primary eyes narrowed. "Yes, Cadet Winters? Quick question. Do any of these 47 things include a way to actually, do stuff? Or is it all just beeping and analyzing?" A Chirruk named Tick-Tick chittered disapprovingly. "The equipment is designed for maximum survival probability, human. Following protocol ensures a 94.6% success rate." Right. Jake nodded. "And the other 5.4%? Acceptable losses," Threllis said flatly. Jake leaned back in his chair. "Cool. Just wanted to clarify that your fancy gear still kills people sometimes." Threllis's translator unit made a sound that was probably the alien equivalent of a deep sigh. "The equipment provides everything necessary for survival in a hostile environment. Unlike your species' primitive methods, we have evolved beyond crude improvisation." "Yeah, about that." Jake stood up, and the entire room noticed he was carrying exactly one item: a large hunting knife in a worn leather sheath attached to his belt. That was it. No backpack, no equipment harness. Just a knife, and the kind of confidence that made safety inspectors nervous. Threllis's mandibles literally dropped. "Cadet Winters, where is your survival kit?" Jake patted the knife. "Right here. That is a sharpened piece of metal. It's a really good piece of sharpened metal. Though, the regulations explicitly state—" "I read the regulations," Jake interrupted. "All 63 pages. Very thorough. Loved the footnotes. But here's the thing, Commander. My species survived ice ages, predators the size of your ship, diseases, famines, and each other for about 300,000 years before we invented the atmospheric analyzer. I think I'll manage a week on a jungle planet with my knife." Threllis's skin shifted to what his species displayed when experiencing profound disbelief. "This is not acceptable. You will take the standard equipment, or you will fail this examination." Jake smiled. "Pretty sure the actual rule says I need to survive for 7 days and return to the extraction point. Doesn't say anything about how I do it." A Lumix named Prism chimed in, their voice like wind through crystal caves. "Commander, perhaps the human has a point. The regulations do focus on outcome rather than methodology." Threllis looked like he was contemplating retirement. Fine. When you are consumed by a Kappa 7, Ridge Prowler, do not expect early extraction. You signed the waiver." "Wouldn't dream of it," Jake said cheerfully. "Besides, I've got this whole thing figured out. Step 1. Don't die. Step 2. Repeat Step 1 for 7 days. Step 3. Collect my passing grade. Your overconfidence will be your downfall, human." Jake headed for the door, then paused. "Hey, Commander, quick question. How many of those 47 items run on batteries?" 32 of them. "And how many spare batteries are included?" Threllis consulted his pad. "Each item includes one standard power cell rated for approximately 48 hours of continuous use. So on day 3, when half your gear stops working, you're just gonna, what? Ask the Deathworld nicely to take a break while you wait for rescue." The room went very quiet. Jake tapped his knife. "This doesn't need batteries, Commander. See you on the other side." As the human left, Threllis turned back to his remaining cadets, determined to restore order. He will learn. They always learn. Kappa 7 does not forgive arrogance. But deep in his secondary brain, the one Methodians used for uncomfortable thoughts they didn't want to acknowledge, Threllis felt the tiniest seed of doubt. Humans had survived on a death world for their entire evolutionary history. Earth wasn't a training ground, it was their home. The drop pod screamed through Kappa 7's atmosphere like meteors with anxiety disorders. Inside Pod 7, Jake checked his knife one more time, made sure it was secure, and then did what humans do best when falling toward a hostile alien planet. He took a nap. In Pod 3, Tick-Tick was running pre-landing diagnostics on all 47 pieces of equipment simultaneously, his compound eyes flickering between 17 different readouts. Atmospheric analyzer functioning at optimal levels, shelter generator nominal, nutrient paste dispenser showing green across all metrics. In Pod 5, Prism was meditating, their all-store, crystalline body refracting the pod's interior lights into tiny rainbows, trying to achieve the mental clarity their species required before stressful situations. It wasn't working. They kept thinking about what the human had said about batteries. Aboard the orbital monitoring station, Commander Threllis watched the pod telemetry with all 4 arms crossed. All pods approaching landing zone. Prepare for dispersal pattern Sigma 7. His assistant, a young Methodian named Calix, glanced at the human's bio-readings. Sir, Cadet Winters' heart rate is remarkably low. Perhaps his equipment is malfunctioning. He has no equipment, Threllis muttered. He's probably unconscious from fear. Actually, sir, his breathing patterns suggest he's asleep. Threllis's translator made that sighing sound again. The pods hit the jungle canopy at precisely calculated intervals, retro thrusters firing to slow their descent. They landed with the gentle grace of 3-ton metal eggs trying not to break. The hatches hissed open, and the cadets emerged into Kappa 7. The jungle was exactly as advertised, aggressively alive. The air was thick enough to chew. Everything was either bright colors that screamed, "I'm poisonous," or dark colors that screamed, "I eat things that are poisonous." The sounds were a symphony of creatures that probably hadn't gotten the prophetic memo about the food chain having a top. Tick-Tick immediately deployed his atmospheric analyzer. Oxygen content, 21%. Humidity, 93%. Detecting 742 potential toxins in the local flora. Recommendation: remain in cleared landing zone and establish shelter perimeter. Prism's pod had landed near a stream that looked beautiful and probably contained something that would dissolve them. They began unpacking their kit with methodical care, each item placed exactly according to the manual. Jake's pod had crashed through the canopy and landed in a small clearing. He opened the hatch, stepped out, took a deep breath of the swampy air, and grinned. Now this is what I'm talking about. Smells like camping in Louisiana. With extra murder. He looked around, orienting himself in about 3 seconds, then started walking toward higher ground. His knife stayed sheathed. He didn't need it yet. Back in orbit, Threllis leaned toward his monitoring screens. Cadet Winters is deviating from standard protocol. He should be establishing a perimeter and conducting environmental analysis. Sir, he appears to be. Looking at plants? Jake was indeed looking at plants. Specifically, he was looking at a thick-stalked vine with broad leaves that seemed to be shedding water rather than absorbing it. Hydrophobic surface, probably naturally waxy. That'll work. He marked the location mentally and kept moving. Then the rain started. Not regular rain. Kappa 7 didn't believe in regular anything. This was the kind of rain that made you understand why the planet had earned the Deathworld classification. The drops hit the ground and sizzled, slightly acidic. Not enough to melt you instantly, but enough to make standing in it for an hour a really bad idea. In his zone, Tick-Tick's protocols kicked in immediately. Emergency precipitation detected. Deploying regulation shelter. He pressed a button on his multi-spectrum shelter generator. A force field shimmered into existence, creating a perfect dome around him. Inside, he was dry, safe, and smugly confident in the superiority of proper equipment. Prism activated their shelter unit as well, though it took them 90 seconds longer because they'd been in the middle of alphabetizing their supplies. Jake looked up at the sky, let a drop hit his face, and licked his lip. Yep, acidic. Maybe pH 5? Not terrible. He jogged over to the vine he'd spotted earlier, cut several of the broad leaves with his knife first time he'd drawn it and started weaving them together. His hands moved fast, muscle memory from a childhood spent in every questions of Bunley. Boy Scouts and a teenagehood spent annoying survival instructors. 3 minutes later, he had a rough poncho made of overlapping leaves, the waxy coating shedding the acidic rain like it was nothing. He found an overhang in a rock formation, settled in, and watched the rain fall. Threllis stared at his screen in silence. Sir? Calix ventured carefully. He made clothing out of local flora. Yes, sir. In 3 minutes. Yes, sir. Without analyzing it first, the human appears to have determined its properties through observation and basic tactile assessment. Threllis's primary brain and secondary brain were now having a very heated argument with each other. Begin continuous monitoring of Cadet Winters. I want to know every single regulation he violates. This will make an excellent case study in why protocols exist. But his translator unit made that sighing sound one more time. Day 1 had barely started, and the human hadn't even broken a sweat. By hour 6, the other cadets had transformed their landing zones into miniature fortresses of regulation compliance. Tick-Tick's camp looked like a military installation designed by someone who really loved right angles. His shelter generator hummed peacefully in the center, surrounded by perfectly organized equipment stations. He'd even created a perimeter marked with micro-beacons that would alert him to any approaching lifeforms larger than 5 kilograms. Prism had established what could only be described as a crystalline meditation garden with survival features. Everything was arranged according to some complex geometric principle that probably made sense to silicon-based lifeforms but looked like abstract art to everyone else. Jake had built a lean-to, that's it. A simple lean-to made from branches, leaves, and vine cordage he'd twisted together. It took him maybe 20 minutes. The rest of the time he'd spent exploring, learning the terrain, and finding a stream that didn't look like it wanted to kill him. The water was clear, fast-moving, and cold. He tested it carefully, just a tiny sip at first, then waited. No burning sensation, no weird numbness. Good enough. He filled a hollow segment of bamboo-like plant he'd found and headed back to camp. In orbit, Threllis was taking notes. Lots of notes. Hour 7. Human continues to ignore basic decontamination protocols. Water consumption from untested source. Estimated time until illness 4 to 6 hours. Calix was watching a different screen. Sir, Cadet Tick-Tick's nutrient paste dispenser appears to be malfunctioning. Down in the jungle, Tick-Tick was experiencing his first crisis. He pressed the dispenser button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Still nothing. He ran a diagnostic. The error message was cheerfully unhelpful. Moisture detected in dispensing mechanism. Please service unit in climate-controlled environment. This is a jungle, Tick-Tick said to nobody in particular. Everything is moisture. He tried his backup rations. They were supposed to be sealed in moisture-proof containers. Supposed to be. Apparently, Kappa 7's humidity had opinions about what counted as moisture-proof. The rations had achieved a consistency that could charitably be described as biological soup. Tick-Tick did what any well-trained cadet would do. He filed an incident report and requested guidance from Orbital Command. Threllis received the report with his equivalent of a grimace. Inform Cadet Tick-Tick that early extraction for equipment malfunction is not authorized. He has emergency rations rated for 7 days. Sir, those are the rations that have degraded. Then he should have checked them during pre-deployment inspection. He did, sir. They were sealed. The humidity here apparently exceeds the container specifications. Threllis pulled up the environmental data. 93% humidity. The containers were rated for 90% maximum. Someone in procurement was going to have a very unpleasant conversation about decimal points. Meanwhile, Jake had started a fire. Not with the regulation emergency heat source that ran on power cells. Not with some advanced plasma generator. With a bow drill made from dry wood he'd found in a hollow tree, using the back of his knife to carve the pieces. The first ember glowed. Jake carefully transferred it to a bundle of dry plant fibers he'd collected, blew gently, and watched the flame catch. There we go. Humans 1, Deathworld 0. He'd already caught fish. 3 of them, from the stream, using a spear he'd carved and hardened in the fire. The fish looked like someone had crossed a trout with a porcupine and added extra teeth for intimidation purposes. Jake cleaned them with his knife, gutted them, and set them on flat rocks near the fire to cook. Prism's sensors detected the smoke and the chemical signature of combustion. They immediately sent a priority alert to Orbital Command. Uncontrolled fire detected in human sector. Possible emergency situation. Threllis switched to Jake's visual feed. The human was sitting cross-legged by a small, well-contained fire, cooking fish, looking more relaxed than anyone had a right to look on a death world. That's not an emergency, Threllis said slowly. That's cooking. Cooking. Calix sounded confused. As in, thermal preparation of organic matter for consumption? Humans still do that. It's primitive. Sir, the database says cooking food actually increases nutritional bioavailability and eliminates pathogens. It's technically more advanced than paste dispensers. Threllis didn't respond. He was too busy watching Jake eat fish that by all rights should have been toxic, indigestible, or at minimum required laboratory analysis before consumption. The human finished his meal, carefully extinguished his fire with water and dirt, and then did something that made Threllis's tertiary brain start paying attention. Jake sat very still and just listened. He wasn't checking equipment. He wasn't running scans. He was listening to the jungle. After about 10 minutes, he nodded to himself and whispered, "Okay, so the big predators hunt at dusk. The canopy goes quiet about 20 minutes before they move. Good to know." He'd learned the jungle's rhythm just by paying attention. Tick-Tick, meanwhile, was staring at his ruined rations and calculating his caloric deficit with growing alarm. "This is suboptimal. This is highly suboptimal." Prism was handling it better, since they could photosynthesize, but even they were beginning to wonder if maybe the regulation kit had a few design flaws. Night fell on Kappa 7 like a hammer. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in 20 minutes. Strange sounds echoed through the darkness. Things howled. Things screamed. Things made sounds that didn't have names yet but probably meant, "I'm hungry and you're made of meat." Tick-Tick activated his perimeter defense system and huddled in his shelter, trying not to think about food. Prism entered a low-power meditative state, their crystalline form dimming to conserve energy. Jake added a few more branches to his lean-to's structure, checked that his knife was within easy reach, and went to sleep with the confidence of someone whose ancestors had been doing exactly this for hundreds of thousands of years. In orbit, Threllis watched the 3 vital signs monitors. The aliens' stress hormones were elevated, their heart rates were high, their resource consumption patterns suggested anxiety. The human's readings looked like he was having a spa day. "Calyx," Threllis said quietly. "Yes, sir?" "Pull up Earth's environmental classification." A moment later, the data appeared. Threllis read it in silence. Earth was classified as a death world, Class 7. The same as Kappa 7, gravity slightly higher than galactic standard, dangerous megafauna, extreme weather patterns, toxic plant species, predators with sophisticated hunting strategies. Humans hadn't trained for this. They'd been forged by it. "Oh," Threllis said, his translator unit making a sound it had never made before. It was the sound of someone realizing they might have dramatically misunderstood something important. Day 3 arrived with the kind of morning that makes you remember why some planets are called Deathworlds. The humidity had somehow increased, which shouldn't have been physically possible, but Kappa 7 didn't care about anyone's physics degree. The air was so thick you could practically swim through it. Tick-Tick was not doing well. His 47 regulation items were down to maybe 32 functional pieces. The shelter generator was flickering intermittently. His atmospheric analyzer had given up entirely, and now just displayed a spinning loading icon that felt deeply philosophical. And he was hungry, so incredibly hungry. The emergency nutrition paste was supposed to last 7 days. But the dispenser had been designed by someone who apparently thought emergency meant comfortable laboratory conditions. He'd managed to get maybe 30% of his required calories over the past 2 days. His compound eyes were starting to see double, which was really problematic when you already had 17 lenses per eye. Prism was managing better thanks to photosynthesis, but even they were getting worried. Their power reserves were lower than expected because Kappa 7's thick canopy filtered out more sunlight than the briefing data had suggested. Apparently, the survey team had taken their readings during the dry season. This was not the dry season. Jake, meanwhile, had thrived. His camp now included a smoking rack where he was preserving extra fish, a water collection system using those waxy leaves to funnel morning dew into his bamboo containers. And he'd even built a small chair from branches because comfort mattered. He'd explored a 2-kilometer radius around his camp, memorized every game trail, every water source, every plant that looked edible, and several that definitely weren't. He'd also noticed something the others hadn't. The wildlife had patterns. The ridge prowlers, those mega-bear things the commander had mentioned, they had territories. They marked trees with claw marks that went up about 3 meters. Jake had found 5 distinct territory markers, which meant there were probably 5 different prowlers in this valley, and one of them was heading toward Tick-Tick's camp. Jake saw the signs first. The smaller creatures had gone quiet in a specific direction. Birds or whatever passed for birds on Kappa 7 had stopped calling. There was a smell on the wind, musky and sharp, like wet dog mixed with murder. He grabbed his knife and started running. In orbit, Threllis was doing his routine monitoring check when alarms started screaming across his console. "Calyx, what am I looking at?" "Large predator, sir. Biosignature matches a Kappa 7 ridge prowler. It's moving toward Cadet Tick-Tick's position." Threllis pulled up the visual feed. The creature was massive, easily 4 meters tall at the shoulder, with 6 legs that ended in claws designed by evolution's angriest engineer. Its hide was armored with plates that had probably shrugged off everything the jungle could throw at it. And it looked hungry. Alert Cadet Tick-Tick immediately. Activate emergency extraction protocols. But Tick-Tick had already seen it. His perimeter sensors had finally done their job, blaring a warning that sent his heart rate into what his species called imminent death panic mode. He did exactly what the manual said. He activated his emergency beacon, sealed himself inside his shelter dome, and huddled in the center, hoping the force field would hold. The Prowler approached the camp with the casual confidence of something that had never lost a fight. It sniffed at the force field, tilted its massive head, and then did something the designers of the shelter generator had apparently never considered. It started digging under it. No, Tick-Tick chittered, watching dirt spray up as the creature's claws excavated a trench with terrifying efficiency. The manual did not cover this. The manual specifically did not cover this. The Prowler's head appeared under the force field edge, its eyes, all 6 of them, locked onto Tick-Tick. Its mouth opened, revealing teeth that made sharks look like they had dental problems. Threllis was shouting into his comm. Extraction pod deployed. ETA 4 minutes. Cadet Tick-Tick, stay calm. And that's when Jake arrived. He didn't announce himself. He didn't shout a battle cry. He just appeared at the edge of the clearing, assessed the situation in about 2 seconds, and made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed in any sensible military organization. He picked up a rock and threw it at the Ridge Prowler's head. It bounced off the armored hide with a sound like knocking on a tank. The Prowler pulled its head out from under the force field and turned all 6 eyes toward this new, much smaller annoyance. Yeah, that's right, Jake said, his voice steady despite the fact he was facing down something that could swallow him whole. Over here, ugly. Come on, the Prowler roared. The sound physically hurt, a bass rumble that made your internal organs remember they were mortal. It charged. Jake ran, but not away. That was the key detail that made Threllis's primary and secondary brains both have simultaneous panic attacks. The human ran parallel to the charge, then cut sharply left, leading the Prowler away from Tick-Tick's camp and toward a dense section of jungle. What is he doing? Threllis whispered. Sir, I think he's hurting it? Jake was absolutely hurting it. He'd spent 2 days learning this jungle, and he knew something the Prowler didn't. There was a massive deadfall about 60 meters ahead, a tangle of fallen trees that created a natural maze. He sprinted toward it, the Prowler closing the distance behind him with horrifying speed. He dove into the deadfall, his human flexibility letting him squeeze through gaps the Prowler couldn't follow. The creature smashed into the fallen trees, roaring in frustration, trying to find a way through. Jake used the time to climb. Hand over hand, using his knife to grip and pull when the bark was too smooth, he scaled one of the dead trees until he was about 5 meters up. The Prowler spotted him and started climbing too, because apparently evolution had given these things absolutely every advantage and no weaknesses whatsoever. Except one. Jake had noticed something during his explorations. The trees on Kappa 7 had a parasitic vine that grew between the bark and the wood. When the tree died, the vine dried out but stayed in place, making the bark incredibly loose. The Prowler's claws dug into the tree trunk. The bark held for exactly 3 seconds, then separated from the wood in massive sheets. The creature fell, tumbling backward into the deadfall with an impact that sounded like someone dropping a car. It wasn't hurt, the armored hide saw to that, but it was disoriented and very, very angry. Jake didn't try to fight it. He did something smarter. He moved to the opposite side of the deadfall and started making noise, banging his knife against a tree trunk. The Prowler charged toward the sound, getting more tangled in the fallen timber. Then Jake did it again from another angle, and another. He kept the creature moving, confused, spinning in circles, until finally it had enough. The Prowler let out one more frustrated roar and crashed away through the jungle, heading back toward its own territory. Jake waited, perfectly still, for 10 full minutes. Only when he was absolutely certain it was gone did he climb down and make his way back to Tick-Tick's camp. The insectoid was still sealed in his shelter, trembling. Jake tapped on the force field. Hey, it's gone. You're good. Tick-Tick deactivated the shelter and stared at Jake with all 17 lenses per eye. You saved my life. Yeah, well, couldn't let you get eaten on day 3. That would have really screwed up the curve for the rest of us. You fought a Ridge Prowler with a knife. I didn't fight it. Fighting was exactly what I didn't do. I annoyed it, confused it, and convinced it I wasn't worth the calories. Big difference. The extraction pod arrived a minute later, completely unnecessary now. Threllis's voice came through on the comm, shaking slightly. Cadet Winters, what you did was reckless, dangerous, and violated approximately 14 safety protocols. Yeah, but Tick-Tick's not dead, so I'm calling it a win. There was a long silence from orbit. How did you know the bark would fail? I didn't. Not for sure. But I saw the vine parasites on every dead tree I checked. Seemed like a pretty good bet. And if I was wrong, well, plan B was to be really fast. Tick-Tick looked at the human with something approaching religious awe. Your species is insane. We prefer adaptable, Jake said. But yeah, little bit insane too. You want some fish? I've got extra. In orbit, Threllis stared at his screens. He pulled up the human's bio readings from the encounter. Elevated heart rate, yes, but nothing extreme. Stress hormones present but controlled. The human had faced down an apex predator with nothing but a knife, and his understanding of the environment, and his body had responded like it was just another Tuesday. Because for humans, it probably was. Threllis's translator made that sighing sound again, but this time it sounded less like frustration and more like respect. That evening, something unprecedented happened in the history of the Galactic Survival Corps examination program. The cadets had a campfire meeting. Well, Jake had a campfire. The others just showed up. Tick-Tick arrived first, hauling what remained of his 47 regulation items. Most of them were now expensive paperweights. He set them down near Jake's lean-to and just stood there, all of his legs, trembling slightly with exhaustion and hunger. Sit down before you fall down, Jake said, gesturing to a log he'd positioned by the fire. Fish is almost ready. Tick-Tick sat. He watched the flames with his compound eyes, probably running calculations about thermal efficiency and combustion ratios, because that's what his species did when confronted with literally anything. Prism arrived 20 minutes later, their crystalline form catching the firelight and scattering it into a dozen colors. They'd powered down to minimum energy consumption, moving slowly to conserve resources. I hope I am not intruding. The more the merrier, Jake said. Though I gotta be honest, I have no idea if you folks can even eat fish. I cannot, Prism admitted. But I would appreciate the warmth. My thermal regulation systems are not functioning optimally in this humidity. Pull up a spot. For a while, nobody spoke. Jake finished cooking the fish, gave 2 to Tick-Tick, who devoured them with the desperation of someone who'd been living on 30% rations for 3 days, and just tended the fire. The jungle made its night sounds around them, but here in the circle of firelight, it felt almost safe. Finally, Tick-Tick broke the silence. I do not understand you, human. That's fair. I don't understand me half the time either. No, I mean... Tick-Tick gestured with one of his upper appendages at the camp, at the fire, at the lean-to. You brought 1 tool. 1. I brought 47, designed by the greatest scientific minds in the galaxy, tested for 3 centuries. And you are thriving while I nearly died today. Jake poked at the fire with a stick. Want the honest answer, or the answer that won't make you feel bad? I want to understand. Okay. Jake leaned back, looking up at the alien stars through the canopy. Here's the thing about humans. We're not the strongest species. We're not the fastest. We don't have natural armor or claws or the ability to photosynthesize. What we have is this. He tapped his temple. The ability to look at any situation and figure it out. Pattern recognition, Prism offered quietly. More than that. Adaptation. My species spent 300,000 years on a planet that was actively trying to kill us. Ice ages, droughts, predators that made that ridge prowler look like a puppy. We survived because we learned to use everything. A sharp rock becomes a knife becomes a spear becomes a fishing rod. Fire keeps us warm, cooks our food, scares away predators, purifies water, and signals for help. 1 tool, infinite applications. Tick-Tick's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. But the regulation equipment is designed for those same applications. Yeah, and that's the problem. Your gear is designed for specific solutions to specific problems. What happens when you encounter a problem the designers didn't anticipate? The equipment fails, Tick-Tick said quietly. Exactly. But a knife? A knife doesn't fail because it's not trying to be smart. It's just a sharp edge. What I do with that sharp edge, that's where the intelligence happens. Up here. He tapped his head again. Your people designed intelligence into the tools. My people kept the intelligence in the brain and made the tools simple. Prism's crystalline structure chimed softly, their species equivalent of a laugh. We prepared for Kappa 7 specifically. You prepared for anything generally. Now you're getting it. Jake threw another branch on the fire. You know what the real difference is? You folks thought of this as a test to pass. I thought of it as a place to live. Tests have right answers and wrong answers. Living just has what works and what doesn't. Is that why you spent time exploring instead of fortifying? Prism asked. Yep, can't fortify against everything, but if I know the terrain, know the water sources, know which plants are useful and which animals to avoid, then I'm not defending against the environment. I'm part of it. That prowler today? I didn't fight it because I'm not stupid. I can't win that fight. But I knew the ground better than it did, so I used that. Tick-Tick was quiet for a long moment. My species built our entire civilization on the principle that proper preparation prevents problems. We have protocols for everything. It has served us well for millions of years. And that's great when you're in a controlled environment, Jake said gently. But life isn't a controlled environment. Life is chaos with occasional snack breaks. The universe doesn't care about your protocols. So what do? It was almost a whisper. Jake smiled. You adapt. Look, you're already doing it. You came here instead of sitting in your camp trying to fix equipment that can't be fixed. That's adaptation. You recognize that my methods work and you came to learn. That took guts, my friend. I came because I was starving. Motivation is motivation. I'll take it. Jake handed over another fish. Here's what I learned growing up. My grandfather used to take me camping in places that make this look friendly. He'd say, Jake, you can carry 100 pounds of gear and still die, or you can carry 10 pounds of knowledge and thrive. The gear was never the point. The knife isn't magic. It's just steel. What matters is knowing what to do with it. Prism's form flickered with internal light. On my world we have a saying. A crystal grown in perfect conditions is beautiful but brittle. A crystal grown in hardship is flawed but unbreakable. I am beginning to understand what it means. Your world sounds pretty wise. Yet we still created a survival kit with 47 items that fail in humidity. Jake laughed, a genuine sound that echoed through the jungle. Yeah, well, nobody's perfect. Here's a secret though. Half of human survival history is just a long series of screw-ups that we learned from. We didn't get good at this because we're naturally talented. We got good because we failed so many times that we ran out of ways to fail. Tick-Tick clicked his mandibles in his species' version of amusement. That is perhaps the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me. I try. Jake stood up and stretched. Look, you guys want to know the real secret? The actual, no kidding, this is what makes humans different secret? Both aliens leaned forward. We're okay with being scared. That prowler today scared the hell out of me. I'm not some fearless warrior. I'm just a guy who knows that being scared is information. It tells me something is dangerous. But being scared and being paralyzed aren't the same thing. Fear makes you alert. It makes you think. It makes you creative. Your protocols try to eliminate fear by having a procedure for everything. But sometimes fear is the appropriate response. And the trick is to use it instead of letting it use you. He sat back down. You're both going to pass this exam. You know why? Because you're here, learning, adapting. That's all survival is. It's not about having the right gear or following the right steps. It's about being willing to change your mind when the evidence says you should. Up in orbit, Threllis was listening to every word through the audio feed. Calyx stood beside him, watching the commander's expressions cycle through about 17 different emotions. Sir, should we include this conversation in the official record? Threllis was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. Calyx, pull up the Galactic Survival Corps training manual. The whole thing. All 6,000 pages. Yes, sir. May I ask why? Because I think we need to rewrite it. All of it. Sir? Threllis pointed at the screen, where 3 cadets from 3 different species sat around a primitive fire, sharing food and knowledge. We've been teaching survival wrong for 3 centuries. We've been teaching equipment operation when we should have been teaching adaptation. We've been teaching protocols when we should have been teaching principles. We've been preparing cadets for specific scenarios when we should have been preparing them for uncertainty itself. That's a significant change in doctrine, sir. Yes, it is. Threllis made a note in his personal log. And it's about time. On the surface, Jake was teaching Tick-Tick how to identify which plants had edible roots. Prism was asking questions about fire management. The human answered everything patiently, turning a Deathworld into a classroom. One more thing, Jake said as the fire burned low. That knife I brought? I've had it for 15 years. My dad gave it to me when I turned 18. It's been with me on 4 continents, through deserts and mountains and forests. I could have brought a brand new high-tech blade. But this one? It has history. It has meaning. And sometimes, having something you trust is worth more than having something perfect. He pulled the knife out, the firelight playing across the worn handle. Tools are important. but they're not as important as the hand that holds them or the mind that guides them. Remember that, and you'll survive anywhere. Tik-Tik looked at his pile of broken regulation equipment, then at the simple knife, then at the human who'd saved his life with nothing but that knife and a deep understanding of how things worked. I think, he said slowly, that I have been educated incorrectly about many things. Hey, welcome to the club, Jake grinned. Realizing you were wrong is the first step to being less wrong. That's called growth. The three of them sat there as the fire burned down to embers, 3 species from 3 different worlds, learning the oldest lesson in the universe, that survival wasn't about the tools you carried, but about the wisdom to use whatever you had. And somewhere in orbit, a commander who'd built his entire career on regulations and protocols was having the kind of epiphany that changes civilizations. Extraction day arrived with anticlimactic punctuality. The recovery shuttle descended through Kappa 7's atmosphere at exactly 0700 hours, standard galactic time, because the Methodians believed in schedules, even when picking people up from Deathworlds. Tik-Tik was waiting at the designated extraction point, looking significantly less shiny than when he'd arrived. About half of his 47 regulation items were scattered across the jungle in various states of failure. He'd learned to start fires. He could identify 3 edible plants. He'd even caught something resembling a fish, though it had taken him 6 hours, and he'd fallen in the stream twice. Prisms stood nearby, their crystalline structure showing minor fractures from thermal stress but otherwise intact. They'd spent the last 4 days in what could only be described as a philosophical transformation, meditating on the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Jake showed up last, looking like he'd just returned from vacation. His clothes were clean, he'd figured out which plants made decent soap. His hair was tied back with vine cordage. He was actually carrying more than he'd arrived with. A walking stick he'd carved, several pouches made from woven plant fibers, and a collection of interesting rocks he thought looked cool. The shuttle door opened and Commander Threllis descended the ramp, all 4 arms clasped behind his back in formal inspection posture. His expression was unreadable, which for a Methodian meant he was experiencing at least 6 emotions simultaneously, and didn't know which one to lead with. "Cadets," he announced, "congratulations on surviving the examination period. You will now be evaluated on protocols followed, equipment maintenance, and adherence to established safety guidelines." Tik-Tik's antennae drooped. He'd violated approximately 90 protocols. However, Threllis continued, and something in his tone made everyone pay attention. Circumstances have prompted a review of evaluation criteria. Cadet Tik-Tik, despite equipment, failures and protocol deviations, you demonstrated adaptability and willingness to learn alternative methodologies. Pass. Tik-Tik's mandibles dropped open. Cadet Prism, you successfully maintained core functions while exploring supplementary survival techniques. Pass. Prism chimed softly in surprise. Cadet Winters. Threllis turned to Jake, and his translator unit made a sound it had definitely never made before. It might have been respect. You arrived with 1 tool, and departed with more knowledge than the Galactic Survival Corps has accumulated in 3 centuries. You saved a fellow cadet's life. You demonstrated that survival is not about equipment, but about adaptation, observation, and creative problem-solving. Exemplary pass, Jake grinned. Does that come with a certificate or just bragging rights? It comes with a request. Threllis stepped closer. How would you feel about redesigning our entire training program? Sir? Calyx appeared from the shuttle, looking confused. The human is correct. We've been teaching this wrong. Starting next cycle, the regulation survival kit will be revised. To how many items, sir? Threllis looked at Jake, who was leaning on his hand-carved walking stick with that insufferable human confidence. How many items would you recommend, Cadet Winters? Jake pretended to think about it. Well, I'd say 3 absolute essentials. A good knife for sure. Maybe some cordage or paracord because that's universally useful. And, he paused for dramatic effect. And? Jake reached into one of his plant fiber pouches and pulled out a small roll of silver material that definitely hadn't been there before. Duct tape. The silence was profound. You had duct tape this entire time? Tik-Tik's voice rose about 3 octaves. Yeah, it was wrapped around the knife handle. Figured I'd save it for emergencies. You know, real emergencies, not just regular Deathworld stuff. Threllis's translator unit made that sound again, but now it was definitely laughter. You let me believe you brought only a knife. I brought only a knife. The duct tape came with the knife. Technically, that's still 1 item. That is the most human logic I have ever encountered. Thank you, I try. Jake twirled the duct tape roll around 1 finger. But seriously, Commander, You want to know what should be in the survival kit? Item 1, something sharp. Item 2, something strong. Item 3, something to start fires. Everything else is just creativity and stubbornness. And the knowledge to use them. Well, yeah, but you can't pack knowledge in a box. That's kind of the point. Threllis made a note on his datapad with one hand, while the other three gestured in what his species did when they were having revelations. The new survival manual will be considerably shorter. How much shorter? Calyx asked nervously. Page 1. Bring a knife. Page 2. Figure it out. Threllis looked up at his assistant. We'll workshop the wording. As they boarded the shuttle, Tick-Tick sidled up to Jake. Will you really help redesign the program? If they let me. Might be fun teaching you folks how to be properly paranoid about nature. I thought you said we should work with nature, not against it. Yeah, but you can work with something and still respect that it might eat you. It's called balance. Prism's crystalline form chimed thoughtfully. I believe I am going to recommend this experience to my entire species. We have become too comfortable with artificial environments. The shuttle lifted off, leaving Kappa 7 behind. Through the viewport, the jungle stretched out in every direction, beautiful and deadly and indifferent to the opinions of civilized species about how survival should work. 3 months later, the Galactic Survival Corps unveiled their new training program. The regulation kit now contained 12 items, instead of 47. The manual was 96 pages instead of 6,000, and every single class now included a module called Human Adaptive Methodology, taught by an instructor who showed up to the first day with nothing but a knife and a roll of duct tape, and the audacity to say, "Let's go camping." Enrollment tripled within the first year. Threllis wrote in his final report. Previous doctrine assumed survival required controlling the environment. Human methodology demonstrates survival requires understanding the environment. The difference is significant. Recommend full integration of adaptive principles across all galactic safety programs. And, in the postscript, where he thought nobody would read it, he added, perhaps we have spent too long trying to eliminate risk and not enough time learning to dance with it. The humans figured this out millennia ago. We are only now catching up. Jake kept the knife, obviously. He also kept the duct tape, which had exactly 37 centimeters remaining after he'd used it to patch his boot on day 6. When asked if he'd ever do another Deathworld survival exam, he just smiled and said, sure, as long as they let me bring my knife. Just the knife? The interviewer asked. Just the knife, Jake confirmed. What if you need more? Then I'll make more. That's kind of the whole point. And somewhere in the archives of human philosophy, filed between, necessity is the mother of invention, and if it's stupid, but it works, it ain't stupid. A new proverb was added. Give a species 47 tools and they'll survive 7 days. Teach a species to think like a human, and they'll survive anywhere. The galaxy was slowly learning what Earth had known all along. The best survival tool ever invented was the 3 pounds of meat between your ears that refused to give up. Everything else was just a bonus.